no one is like handing out these sorts of opportunities out of charity. Like they just are not, right? And so if the seat at this table, then that means that you earned it.
Welcome back to the Free Code Camp podcast. I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org. Each week, we're bringing you insight from founders, developers, and ambitious people getting into tech. This week, we're joined by Angie Jones.
Hello.
She's a teacher, speaker, developer, and holder of 27 software patents. She's also the global vice president of developer relations for TBD, which is a financial technology company. Angie, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Quincy. Good to be here.
Yeah, you're somebody whom I have admired for many years, and you've been involved with the Free Code Camp community in the past as well. I think you were at Lockdown Conf back in the day.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
Yeah, when the pandemic hit and everybody was first going into lockdown, we had this conference, and yeah, it was cool to have you there too. So, yeah, much overdue, like having you here on the Free Code Camp podcast.
Yeah, I'm honored to be here. A huge fan of you, Quincy, as well as Free Code Camp. So the pleasure is all mine.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your kind words, and I'm excited to dive in. We're going to talk a lot about your background. We're going to talk a little bit about test automation, which is kind of your area of specialization before you went into developer relations. And we're also going to talk a lot about education and teaching, because you are an experienced teacher, both at the collegiate level and through, like instructional design, essentially designing these awesome learning paths through Test Automation University. So before we dive into all of that, though, I just want to get a feel for your early days, like where you grew up and what your interests were when you grew up.
Yeah. So I'm born and raised in New Orleans. Actually moved back during the pandemic, so I'm back home now. Early days. So I didn't grow up around like computers or like the internet or like anything like that. So I wasn't even aware that, technology was, an industry that I might be able to work in. Upon graduating from high school, I knew I wanted to go to college, but I literally had no idea what I wanted to focus on. I just really didn't. So I chose business as a major because I figured like that'll give me enough skills to figure it out once I'm an actual working adult. And my father, who was an accountant, he recognized that technology was becoming this emerging trend. And he recommended that I take at least one computer class, Quincy. So he's like, you should know how to use the thing because I'm starting to see them, in pretty much all industries. And so me not knowing anything, I just kind of looked at the course catalog for anything that looked related to computers. And I enrolled in a C++ programming course. I didn't even know what programming was, but I enrolled in that course, and I actually like did really well, and I really enjoyed it, and so my professor at that time recommended that I switch majors to come. The rest is history.
That's awesome. So early on, it sounds like your dad was pushing you to learn about computer science, and then you had some additional guidance from from a professor who took an interest in your future. And business, like in the United States, for everybody, like in our international audience, like 20% or something like 20% of students study business when they go to university, just because it's like a general purpose thing that you can study, and people who don't know what they're going to study, it's very common for people to go into business. So you're pretty representative of like, no, I'm not sure what to study. Hey, making money, that sounds good.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Why not, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. So what were your early experiences like with programming? So you're at the the college level, and you're learning C++, I think, which is kind of like an infamously difficult to code in, but very important programming language that a lot of important applications are written in. Like, do you remember kind of those first few um, weeks of just sitting down and trying to get things done?
Yeah, I do. And I don't know, this might be abnormal and maybe I'm a weirdo, but it wasn't scary. I mean, I didn't know what to be scared of, right? And so that's one of the things. I was just like super naive and oblivious to it all. And so I wasn't fearful at all. And I think that set me up for success. So I just kind of went in with like this open mindset and no fear, and just soaked up the knowledge like a sponge. But I remember it being appealing to me because it felt a lot like the challenges and the excitement that I get when I would play games at home, like with my family, right? There's like some sort of challenge. You need to kind of put the pieces together in order to like come up with some sort of solution, right? And so that has always been fun to me. And so this kind of felt the same way. I remember like getting the programming assignments, and like, maybe they'll be due in like 2 days. So let's say the course was Tuesday and Thursday, right? So you get it on Tuesday, it'll be done by Thursday. I remember like let out. Now, mind you, this is back in the day, so I still don't have a computer or anything like that. Um, as a computer science major, but we had a computer lab. I remember like leaving the classroom and running to the computer lab because I can't wait to like start working on my homework assignment. And I was sitting there until I like did it in like one take, and then we would submit these on like a floppy disk to our instructors. So yeah, those I remember like that excitement, and honestly, that excitement hasn't gone away. It's been decades later at this point, and still get joy when I do get to code.
That's awesome. I'm thrilled that you still have that kind of joie de vivre. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that weird French word correctly, but like when it comes to like being on the computer, it sounds like it's your happy place.
Yeah, I don't do C++ plus plus anymore, but
Yeah,
somewhere in those college years, I was introduced to Java, and I fell in love with that, and I'm still in love with Java.
yeah. And we're going to talk about your Java
Oh,
relationship,
nice.
your
Okay.
your extended kind of advocacy of Java. So not only did you fall in love with Java, but you've since been a big advocate for Java as a developer, and have become a known quantity among like Java developers, and been a big part of the Java ecosystem. I want to talk about that, but one thing that you did when you were in university is a lot of people that graduate, they go into industry immediately. You decided to stick around and teach for a while. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, actually I did both. So I went into the industry right after undergrad, and I went to IBM and I worked there as a software engineer, and I have I don't know where I recognize that I like to teach. Maybe I would help students or something
Yeah.
like that, but I mean, I didn't have formal um training or anything in teaching, right? And when I first graduated, you have all this time on your hands now that you're out of college. Like work is 9 to 5, where you're used to like going to class from like 9 to 4, and then And then you would work on homework and all of this. And so now all of a sudden I had all of this extra time because I didn't have homework and stuff to do. So I remember signing up to do like online tutoring, and I would help like high school and college students with math problems or computer science problems. And I think maybe, oh, I really like, helping other people learn and teaching. And so that's when I went back for my master's in computer
Yeah.
science. And I did that while working at IBM.
Okay.
So I did both of those. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And this is great because I wanted to establish like a kind of a timeline. So you worked at IBM, and my understanding is that you just started out kind of like doing more software, general software development, and you were able to specialize on the job. And this is something that I often tell people: don't worry about specialization when you're just learning to code and trying to get your first developer job. I often tell people try to get a developer job and then see where they put you and which direction they push you in, and then you can kind of specialize on the job while you're making money, and not just while you're kind of like working a day job trying to get into tech. Like I feel
Yeah.
like people prematurely optimize for, oh, I want to be in security, but it's much easier
Ah.
to get into security, I guess, once you're already a developer, like a general purpose developer, right? Would you agree with that sentiment?
I would, but I also think that having like some sort of specialty kind of opened the door for me as well. And this was unique. Try to apply it like across the board, but
Yeah,
when I say that I like really loved Java, like I really loved Java. And so my Java professor was someone, he had, he was like this young professor, and he was in love with Java, and his passion for it just kind of was contagious. But what he did was he stayed back during the summer and did like this Java boot camp for anyone who like really wanted to go into the depths of the
yeah,
language. And he did that to prepare us to take the Java certification. So back then, that's when Sun still owned Java. So it was the Sun, Java programmer certification. And so I did that. Now during this time, Java was actually relatively new. And so this is when we started seeing like these big corporations such as IBM begin to adopt Java as like a language of choice. And so this put me in a really advantageous position where I was able to use that specialty um as a way in. Right now, that doesn't mean I'm like Java guru in IBM or whatever, but it
yeah.
did help open a door. And you're right, I did kind of work as just general purpose software developer. And even like as much as I talk about Java right now, I've had to code in various languages throughout my career. Like right now, we're not even using Java in my shop. Like so, it's like JavaScript um and Swift and like all of these other languages, right? And so I agree with you that people shouldn't like limit themselves or box themselves into one specific technology as the one all be all and that's their only shot. But like put your eggs in a couple of baskets, make sure you understand the foundations and can
Hmm.
work in any capacity. And of course you can have your favorites like I do, but don't limit yourself to that, right?
Yeah. So tell me about like the first few, I guess, months at IBM. This giant, storied American computer company, software company, and now doing all kinds of consulting services as well. But just imagine, like take us back to what it was like joining, perhaps the biggest tech company at the time, or one of them. I mean, you know, if this was like the early 2000s, probably late
Yeah.
90s. I don't want to date you too much,
Early
but
2000s. Don't
yeah.
push me that far back, Quincy. It was it was exciting. Like I remember feeling like super excited that and I actually did a couple of internships at IBM as well as Boeing while I was in
Hmm.
undergrad. And so I was able to kind of get a taste of what life would be like there. And so I knew that it was a super innovative company. And so I was really excited to join. There were like lots of smart who were working on really cool things. And so the first couple of years, they were great. Like I got to learn a lot. I got to work with like, some really brilliant people. But it was also intimidating. So, it was much different than my college environment where we were kind of all learning together. And,
Yeah.
remember I talked about how, oh, there was no fear. I didn't know what to be fearful of. Well, that really changed in the workforce when you have like, these amazing, distinguished engineers just kind of walking down the hallway. And you're like on a team with them and expected to contribute. And so I remember print from everyone, like, I'm young, I'm a woman of color, like, I don't know, I just felt like I like not a sense of belonging, right? And it's not that anyone like made me feel that way, it just was a reality of what it was. Like there aren't people at the table like me, and so it was a bit intimidating. And that actually came back to bite me. So um I would be hesitant to like share my ideas or speak up in meetings where we're brainstorming solutions, because like some of the ideas that I had were like really different than what everyone else was suggesting. And so you automatically just assume like, oh, my idea must be pretty dumb or whatever. And so
Yeah.
I wouldn't speak up. And I remember I got my performance review and it wasn't good. And I didn't understand that back then because all my on time and by deadlines. And yet, there's this bad review that's in his. And I remember that feedback was like, it's not about what you do, but how you do it. And you're not talking in the meetings, you're not engaging with the teams, you're not collaborating, like those. I remember just saying to myself like, all right, well, I guess I have to say my dumb ideas or I'm gonna like get fired. But at least I said something and they won't be able to give me this feedback again,
Yeah.
right? And so I started sharing these quote unquote dumb ideas, and people thought they were brilliant actually, and different and innovative, right? And so we got to the point where I started patenting these ideas within IBM. And so that was a nice lesson for me. I'm glad I had it like earlier in my career, so that I could course correct. And from there, I mean, now I if I tell people that I work with this story, they probably wouldn't believe it, because like I'm always speaking up now and like, saying when things don't sound like a great idea and when they do.
Yeah, that's a really cool you went from to just like not being so, I guess, concerned about what other people thought. If it sounded like a good idea to yourself, maybe there's some merit there. Maybe it's worth sharing the idea. I mean, what would you say to somebody else who's coming into a workforce where they are underrepresented and they may be feeling similar kind of trepidation about sharing their ideas or speaking up because they're like, I'm surrounded by all these smart, accomplished people. Like, who am I to like have anything to say?
I would say that no one is like handing out these sorts of opportunities out of charity. Like they just are not, right? And so if the seat at this table, then that means that you earned it, and it's warranted. And so you're there for a reason, and step into those shoes, and and do what you came to do. Like when you went to that job, you had ideas of like the impact that you were going to make. And when you got there, like, yeah, maybe it doesn't look like what you thought it would look like. And maybe there's not people who are like you in your immediate team, but that's okay. You bring a unique perspective. And what I've learned is like my differences are my superpowers, right? And so your cultural upbringing and how you experience life and your outlook on the world may be different, and that's a great thing. That's a great thing.
Yeah, awesome. Uh, if you found yourself with a seat at the table, you've earned it.
You've
And
earned it.
I love that because it just kind of gives you that agency to push forward, and it's like you have a mandate to share your thoughts because hey, they gave you the podium, right? They gave you the mic, like,
Yeah. What you gonna do with it? That's right.
yeah, awesome. Well, that's really cool. So, of course, you know you've done so much since IBM, and I do want to progress through that. But it sounds like those first few years at IBM, you really found your footing, and that this weird kind of out of nowhere negative feedback that you received was actually like a profoundly good thing in terms of you understand, you know, make a mark. Um, you said that you started patenting things. I do want to ask about that because I don't know anybody who has 27 patents. I think like there are probably some people in the free code camp community that have like one or two patents, but like you're like very prolific in getting software related, you know, processes and things like that patented. Can you just talk a little bit about what your first few patents were and like what that process was like in case anybody has an idea and they're thinking about getting it patented?
Yeah, so I remember I was working on a brand new product. It never actually even saw the light of day. Um, but at IBM, we would always work on like really innovative things and pushing the needle in regards to software. And I had the pleasure like doing my internships to a distinguished engineer at IBM. So that's like one of the top levels you can get to as an engineer within the company. And so I worked with him every day, and his work was very different than what I expected. Um, a corporate job to be, right? And so at that level, he wasn't like sitting around and coding all day. He was doing a lot of brainstorming and a lot of innovating with other distinguished engineers. Like I remember just frequent meetings and whiteboard sessions and things like that. And so I think I picked up a lot over that summer about problem solving and thinking outside of the box to come up with like innovative solutions. And so I carried that with me, throughout my career. And I'm always trying to work on like the cutting edge of tech because that's what excites me, right? There's so many problems that are yet to be solved, and technology is constantly improving and evolving. And it's really fun to take like maybe even an old existing solution and apply it to a new problem and see like what comes from that, right? And so a lot of my ideas or the first patents were around like software improvement. And so it could be things, even tools that I was using. So email tools, I have a whole bunch of patents in like collaborative software. So better ways that email could work, better ways that like chat systems and things like that could work, and especially across different systems. I remember when Second Life first came out. Do you know what
Yeah,
Second Life is? Okay.
yeah.
So
The
for those who don't
it's
know, that's a virtual world. They call them metaverses now. So Second Life, I remember like me and like some other folks at my job, we would kind of just set, these lunchtime brainstorming sessions where we technology that we're not necessarily working on. But like this Second Life thing was fascinating. So like, wow, I can basically have an avatar representation of myself and go like experience a virtual world where I'm teleporting across this thing and speaking to people. Like this was before, like prime time social media, like
yeah.
before Twitter and like Instagram and stuff like that, right? So this was like next level where you were talking and actually engaging with other people over the internet, and there was like this kind of physical representation to it. And so anyway, so we went in there and just came up with like all sorts of like ideas and things that you can do. And so a lot of my patents are in that area as well. Smarter Planet was another big initiative at the time. And so thinking about a lot of things to improve like our environment, like um automated systems and things like that. So it's a great variety. Another thing, as I started inventing, I started recognizing like when to see problems and how to have like this inventor mindset on how to innovatively solve those problems. And so it became a lot more natural to just be in the grocery store. I'll tell you a fun one
Yeah.
where it's like, you know how you go in the grocery store and you inadvertently always choose the wrong line to get in, right? Whatever line you choose is going to be the one that's moving the slowest, right?
It certainly
Um,
feels that way.
yeah, there's some law to that. Like somebody should name that. So anyway, as I like chose the wrong line and I'm standing there, there's this situation where like where you become annoyed with something would be a trigger. Like, how would I solve this with technology, right? And so right then and there, I came up with an idea of how you might be able to calculate the wait times in like a queue, right? And this could span like a physical queue or whatever, but in the context of the grocery store, like, so you start thinking, like, what technologies can I pull in, right? Okay, I have a basket of groceries. Everyone in the line has a basket of groceries. Can we some kind of way, like, count how many items are here and, like, count how many of these are scannable items versus produce or something that they have to punch in? We know who's in line as well. Can we use things like loyalty cards to determine like what are they going to do when they get to the register? Are they going to like go ask for cigarettes and the cashier has to go walk off to go get the cigarettes? That holds the lines up. What method of payment are they going to choose? Like, are they going to write a check? you know
Yeah.
um
Which takes a lot longer than swiping a card.
yeah, is this a coupon queen who's gonna pull out like a book of coupons in the line, right? And you start factoring all of these things in to come up with a calculation. So that's one of my
Wow. So you have a patent for like a system that like looks at those different factors, determines like a wait time so that people, I mean, I could easily see in the future when like these kinds of sensors and all this data is pervading like everything, that you could basically be walking up and it would just say this line 1 minute, this line, this one, or it would just say go over here, like really simple, like
right.
this one,
That's
and
right.
next this one. Once people get in that line, it's just like kind of almost like direct, like a police officer directing traffic or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So a lot of your patents are around like pretty abstract thinking, like you get annoyed by a problem and then you're like, how would we solve this with technology? And then that's like kind of, is that a common theme through a lot of your patents? Or
For a lot of them. Then I would also like target it towards, at some point I started like leading patent sessions. And this is interesting because remember, I'm still pretty new in. So I'm about 2 or 3 years into my career at this point. A lot of these folks are senior, but like I'm collecting these patents like infinity stuff, getting a reputation and respect within the company. And so I started leading the patent mining sessions like after or right before a release, right? And so, okay, we've done all of this cool work. Let's sit down and look at what we've done before we actually ship it and determine if there's anything in here that's worth, protecting intellectually.
okay. And what is the actual process like? If you don't want me diving more into it, again, I have zero
Yeah, I
patents,
don't mind.
so I don't know what this entails. Like what the patent office requires. Like the more you can go into detail about the workflow,
Okay.
I think a lot of people listening would be very interested in this.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so IBM is a big company, and so they have like patent attorneys on staff, which made life a lot easier. So whenever I would have an idea, I would just like open Microsoft Word or something like that and just kind of write the idea as if you were writing a blog post, right? You write what's the problem statement, how might you go about solving this. The interesting thing about patents is that you don't actually have to go through the trouble of implementing the thing. Like I didn't have to implement that checkout calculator, but I had to describe it and design it. So you think about this almost like a architecture skill, right? Where you're thinking through the entire system and like what technology could be used to solve that problem. And so you need a step-by-step guide on how to do this. It can't be abstract, but you don't actually have to go through with implementing it. So anyway, I would do that in like a Word document, and then there you can submit it. So every company I've worked in has had like some sort of patent submission or patent program, right? Where when people have ideas within the company, they can submit it through some form, some channel, right? And someone will evaluate that. And
Yeah.
so at IBM, that it was the same. We would submit it, and we had a board of are also prolific inventors to evaluate it from technical merit, but there would also be a patent attorney on those meetings as well to evaluate it from a legal standpoint, right? Um, and so eventually I even became a part of these boards where I was evaluating patents across IBM, and that was a pretty cool experience. So anyway, you go and you pitch basically. So they schedule they review it. Sometimes if it was something like, oh, this has already been done, they'll just go ahead and like close it out.
Mm-hmm.
But if it sounds interesting enough, it's like, all right, well, here's a scheduled time, and you come and pitch the idea to this board of inventors and like patent attorneys, right? So
So
maybe that's where I got my presentation. If you can like you present to folks like that, like okay, whatever, like you can do it anywhere.
yeah, I mean, if you add the hourly rates of all the different people in the room when you're
Oh yeah,
up there
that's really
talking,
expensive, right? That's a
yeah, is
pretty
it?
expensive.
Yeah,
So anyway, you would have maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes or something, and that includes like pitching the idea and then them like asking you questions about how it would work or any prior art that you found or that they found. Because if there's any prior art, you can't patent it, right?
yeah,
So, so we would go through that process, and it would be like one of three outcomes. So one would be, we don't want to pursue it like our like business, realm, or maybe it's just not a good idea. Maybe like
yeah,
nobody would want to license this, or it could already have been done or whatever. So the three options were to close it, meaning, okay, we're done with this. Let's act like it never happened. Or you could publish it, meaning it's not a patent, but we'll publish this into the public domain. And once it's in the public domain, that prevents anybody else from patenting it. So it's a way to say, okay, yeah, we can do it. It is a cool idea, but we don't want to patent it, but we don't want anybody else to patent it, and we can't do it.
yeah,
And then the third outcome is the one you're aiming for, and that's the okay, let's file a patent application. So from there, the lawyers would take over. They would take your Word document that's like a blog post and is written in human language, and they would put this into legalese, and start drawing little, diagrams and figures and stuff, that the courts would appreciate. And so your idea turns into like your one page idea turns into this 15-page like legal document that they then submit to the patent office. That's pretty expensive to do, and so it was great to have a company kind of foot in the bill there. You got it or not. So you pay this fee, and then you wait years, in fact, before you get a yay or nay on if this will become an actual patent.
yeah. That's so cool. So, I mean, like Einstein worked it in a patent office, right? And his job was to review the legalese and everything of these. It's interesting, like the inventor's original idea, and maybe this wasn't like this back in Einstein's day, but having like a bunch of very experienced lawyers who basically specialize in creating patent applications, submitting them to this U.S. patent office. Um, yeah, it's a really interesting process. It must feel really strange to originate this idea and be on one end of this giant kind of like uh, Rube Goldberg machine of like all these different things going on, and then out the other side comes a patent number, hopefully, or
Yeah, yeah.
years later.
Right, right. Yeah, but it's so cool. I mean, it's super cool. I mean, some of these ideas, like they weren't issued as a patent or granted as a patent until like I was long gone from IBM. So like, like some might still come through now and it's still
Yeah.
like, oh wow, that's so cool.
Do you have like the pieces of paper like framed anywhere? Like, do they send you anything when they send it?
Yeah, so they would pay me money, and then we would also get like these certificates, and when they're granted you would get like the actual patent in like a frame or whatever. So I do have a bunch of those.
Yeah, that's so cool. I'm gonna tell a very quick story if anybody's
Okay.
interested in patents. Uh, the waterbed. You may have heard this before.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
waterbed that was very popular in like the 70s and 1980s in the United States. Basically, a giant cushion of water that sits on top of like kind of like a box spring type bed. So you can like kind of like bounce around. It's really comfortable. It's good for your back, I guess. They've fallen out of favor recently, but the inventor of the waterbed was unable to patent it because it turned out that Robert Heinlein, yes, the novelist who wrote, I think he wrote like a lot of like Starship Troopers, and he had described a waterbed in extreme detail in one of his books, and so the courts ruled, or the patent office ruled, that that was prior art and that it couldn't be patented. So essentially, what he had done inadvertently was he put the idea of waterbeds out into the public domain.
Yeah, that's right. It could be a movie. It doesn't have to be real life. Like even in movies or, some sort of fictional scenario, if it's been described and like you didn't come up with the idea, like it exists already.
Yeah. But then you got things like one-click checkout, which seems very obvious. But they were able to patent that, and that was like a $100 million, billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar patent. I don't know how many people licensed that from Amazon, but yeah, that's cool. Like that. Thanks for giving us that quick tour of the process of getting a patent made, and telling us a little bit about what some of your ideas have been. So I want to talk a little bit more about your progression, because you didn't stay at IBM forever. Like you've moved on and you've done a lot of things. One of the things that I think was really important for a long period of your life was test automation and just writing tests, essentially doing like quality assurance and just making sure that the code did what it was supposed to do. Can you talk about like your journey into test automation?
Yeah. This one is actually fascinating because I did a couple of stints in like feature development and then also like in test automation. And test automation sometimes gets like a rep or this stigma as if it's like less than feature development or whatever. But I'll tell you, I really enjoyed my time doing test automation much more than the feature development. So for the feature development, all right, I'm given a ticket, like okay, you make like a widget or something like that, and like the fun is over after that, like okay, and now it's on to the next ticket. Whereas with test automation, I don't know. I just feel personally like it really strengthened my engineering skills. Because like it's really hard. Like you write way more code to test something than to actually um especially as you come up with like all the various
Yeah.
scenarios to test a specific feature, right? And so I was coding a lot more, and then I was thinking, a lot broader. So when you're pretty much gonna have like the happy path in mind, like what is the use case, and that's what you build for. With test automation, it was like this way to explore all of these various paths and scenarios, and like what happens when the customer does this, that, and the third, or
Yeah.
like they have this like kind of one-off use case or something like that, and making sure like the system was built to handle that, right? And so I really developed like this um customer focused approach to development, and always just thinking about like who is going to use this and how can I make this like a good experience for them, and how do I like capture all of the various ways that this can go wrong. And so when I did build features, like I just had that customer centric mindset, right? And it made me a much stronger developer because I was no longer only developing for the happy path. Like I had a gazillion error cases in mind
Yeah.
as well that like, oh, I better make sure like the code handles this, that, and the third. And so yeah, I just had like a much broader view of how everything operated, just like scope to one feature. Where when I was in feature development, like I don't know, it just felt like this is all I know. Don't ask me about anything else in the system. This is my domain. This is what I am the subject matter expert. Whereas test automation, you take like this step back and this big picture view of the application and all that you can do with it, you know? And so I don't know, I really enjoy that.
Yeah. Maybe we could do like a quick like kind of like role play. Like maybe an interaction between kind of a naive feature developer. I'll play that person. They're like, oh, maybe we're just trying to do a very basic like e-commerce shopping cart feature.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll be like, hey Angie, I finished. Like my shopping cart feature is perfect. I don't think there will be any bugs in it or anything. Here you go.
All
Take a
right.
look at the code. All right, and then now you destroy me.
Right. And so I might get in trouble, but like I found that a lot of developers like are not really great at testing their code. And I can say this because when I do feature development, I'm wearing a different hat and I notice I'm not very great at testing my code, right? Because you just have tunnel vision on making that scenario work. So what I know that that developer has done, you Quincy, you have basically added an item to the cart. You say, "Yep, it's in there. All right, I'm good to go." Right? And so what I'm going to do is take that and I'm going to say, "Okay, so what happens when like I add another quantity before I add it to the cart?" And then what happens when I add another quantity once it's in the cart? And what about subtracting a quantity? And what about deleting it from the cart, right? To re-add it to the cart when it's already in there, right? And so my mind just starts going all over the place with various scenarios. And then I automate all of these scenarios like with code so that they're repeatable. And like what that does, I want to take a moment here because
Yeah,
a lot of people don't appreciate this benefit of automated tests. It's one, yes, to make sure code is okay, but more importantly than that is to make sure it stays that way. And so with proper tests in place, you have the luxury and the comfort of kind of like adding whatever you want and changing the code base in any ways that you want because you have those tests that'll be able to catch if you mess something up. If you don't have these repeatable automated tests in place, it's much harder to refactor your code. It's much harder to add new features or definitely edit existing features because you don't know if you've broken something, right? And so
yeah.
it gives you like that kind of leeway to be able to really go in and like modify the code however you want.
So it's almost like the larger a project gets, the more things can realizing it, and so you end up shipping code that is regressive in the sense that yeah, you added this. Tests kind of give you the confidence to push forward with feature development. Sooner or later, complexity will just become too much for one person to hold in their head. Doesn't
That's
matter
right.
how familiar you are with a large legacy, they're working on it and it's constantly changing. So you need to have the confidence that like, okay, I ran all the tests. We can
Yeah.
push this to production because we're all green light, right?
Yep. And it gives you like a source of truth as well because like I said, you work on one feature, then you move on to the next, and now it's like 2 years later, and you're like X number of features removed from this one that you worked on, right? And now like maybe someone asked a question or you want to add something or like you don't know how this thing was supposed to work. Like somebody, is it supposed to do this or this? And you go, oh gosh, I don't know, I don't remember, right?
Yeah.
You're, and let's say you don't have the documentation around like that level of detail, well your tests are there to tell you exactly like what was expected. And you say, oh, okay, yeah, according to the test, like it's supposed to do, it's also leave your software in a great state if you are moving on to a new team or a new company. People who pick this up have that historical data as well.
Yeah, so the tests kind of serve as like a backup form of documentation, essentially, or in many cases, probably the only documentation. Because let's face it, a lot of people are they finish the feature, maybe they finish the test, hopefully they finish the test, and they probably move on. And maybe they mention it in some meeting that is lost to time, but the tests are still there, right?
That's
And almost kind of like comments in a way that like assert that if shopping cart, I'm not sure how you'd structure it depending on the different tool
Yeah.
you're using, but
Like that scenario where I say I'm adding another one of these things to the cart. What should happen? So someone might say, what should happen? Should we have two of these identical items or should the one item just increase to a quantity of two? Well, I don't know. But if we have tests, we do know like exactly what's supposed to happen.
yeah. So it's kind of the intention of the consensus of the team that was developing that feature. Like every design decision is some sort of trade off, right? Like
That's right.
there might be some corner case where, yeah, I actually do want to have a second instance of this particular item in here. But often the most sensible thing would be to just have two of the same item. And so you have to like figure out what you want to do in those scenarios. And in a way, by writing those tests, you're kind of like codifying what should happen.
That's right.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about testing, which like may seem weird thing to like geek out on and get really interested in, but I mean, compared to you who've been writing tests and doing all this stuff, but like I consider myself someone who very much appreciates tests and the roles that they play, and I think it's the era of the cowboy coder who doesn't write tests and just kind of like quickly blazes through knocking out tickets and stuff. I think that era is done, and the larger an organization becomes, the more complicated the code base becomes, the more absolutely non-negotiable testing becomes.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
yeah, so I do have some testing related questions that I want to
Okay.
ask. For a long time, I think like Google and some other companies would like pride themselves on like people write their own tests. We have like one test engineer per like every 20 feature developers or something like that. Like, what are your thoughts on that approach? And what do you think like a more realistic balance of test engineers and feature development engineers should be?
So when I first started blogging, I wrote this one piece that was kind of controversial. And it was probably the title that led it, but it was like developers should not lead your automation initiatives. And even though developers, and this is a generalization, forgive me, but developers, even though they hate to write tests, they were offended, right? um
That's
which
like I hate having to go to get the groceries, and then my wife's like, "Cool, I'll go get the groceries." No, wait, I want to be able to get the groceries, even though I hate doing it.
yeah, I don't
You
want you to
know?
say that I can't get the
Yeah,
groceries,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So they took it as an affront, like we're not good enough at writing tests. You're trying to take away our privileges, or.
Yeah, but my point there was that um writing tests like is a discipline which is one that you need to study. Like you have to learn like different techniques, you have to keep up with them and maintain them, you have to write them in a way that will last and stand the test of time, right? There's a lot that goes into test automation, and it's a craft in and of itself, as is software development. And so my point there was like you're asking a lot of people when you ask them to basically like lead both of these initiatives, and there's an opportunity cost that comes with that, right? Like I said, when I'm in full mode, full developer mode, feature development, I'm not as great on writing my tests as when I'm in like just full test automation mode, right? um and I don't think it's like a totally different mindset that you find yourself in. when doing either one of these tasks. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, how many, like when a company says, oh, we don't have any dedicated QA folks, we don't have any dedicated test engineers, everybody just writes their own tests and it just works. Like, what would generally, like, at what point do you think a team is large enough or a code base is large enough that they need to get serious about having dedicated people?
I think whenever you have multiple features that can integrate with one another, right? And so if you have like these standalone features that never talk to each other, like okay, maybe it is fine. Like the developer writes their own, because when a developer writes their own, they're like typically writing unit tests that are just for that feature, right? And so it might be scope specifically to just the cart or something like that, right? Like maybe just that API call that sends the item to the cart. And that's like what that's the extent of what they're focused on versus like an integration scenario that goes all the way through like someone shopping, right? And going through multiple items and placing these items in the cart and then doing other things within the cart until they get to the part of payment, right? That's a total flow. And
Yeah.
if I only was responsible for the button, the add button, I'm not doing that whole flow in my testing, right? And the people who were responsible for the other pieces of that flow are only testing their flow. So who's testing the integration of these things together? No one is unless you bring in a dedicated person to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that's a good way of thinking about it. Like, because developers are mostly focused on developing unit tests for their own code, because like at FreeCodeCamp, we have a policy that you can't check in a pull request without having tests that unit tests for the part of the code that is affected. But that says nothing of the integration tests necessary. So how many types of tests are there? There's unit tests, integration tests, kind of sit on top and arch between different functionalities. Are there even more types of tests that people should be aware of?
Yeah, there's like these kind of end-to-end tests too
Mm-hmm.
that like will like more than just the integration of two or more components, but kind of go through a really big flow from beginning to end. There's like smoke tests that are written to kind of just make sure like your environments and everything is like up to par before you get into like real testing. There's performance testing, of course, like how performant is this, and like are we meeting our
Yeah.
which are service level agreements. There's security testing, like can people like hack this? Like can they penetrate this, right? And in a malicious way. There's regression testing, so those tests could be like some of your integration tests as well could fall in that bucket. There's lots of different things that like I'm saying, like if I'm just a feature developer, I'm not thinking through all of these various concerns.
Yeah. And you can definitely tell like a developer, okay, be sure to keep security in mind. Be sure to keep, all these other different considerations in mind. But at the end of the day, like you said, they're gonna somewhat have tunnel vision and just like I'm trying to get this piece of work done, and I
Yeah.
can't spend like, you know, an entire day reflecting on like what if scenarios and stuff like that. But that's basically the job of the test engineer is what if, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's well. Not only did you work as a test engineer, but you've taught a lot of test engineering concepts over the years, and that brings me to something I want to talk about that you've been involved with, which is Test Automation University. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Test Automation University was amazing. So this was an initiative I started which is an AI test automation startup. But like, yeah, there was like a lot of education. I thought how to properly test, how to come up with test strategies, as well as like how to use various tools that are out there in the market. And so we started this initiative there where we had community members to create like courses on the things that they were experts about. And I specifically sought out like the best in the business. So who is the security testing guru, right? who is like the master at performance testing, and let's have them to teach a course on this, and offer it all for free. And so all of these courses are freely available still today on testautomationu.com. And people can basically follow paths or things like this. We've seen like companies send their teams here. If you like don't want to go the route of hiring testers, and maybe you do need to educate your developers on like how this stuff actually works, this is a resource for them. And then if you do have like dedicated testers but they just want to level up, or they're considering like switching to a new tool or something like that, they found this to be very useful as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a super powerful resource that I think everybody should be aware of, and I'm going to link to it in the show notes.
Okay.
But just to verbally describe it for everybody who's listening to the audio version, I won't like do a screen share. But like, there are so many different paths. There's Playwright, for example, very popular framework. Cypress, which we use with JavaScript. There are DevOps testing pathways that talk about like continuous testing and things like that. They're JavaScript specific, Java specific. There's even like a C# and Ruby testing path, and each of these is like probably like 3 or 4 hours. Some of them are like 12 hours. And this is all free content, like free learning resources that you can use if you are just want to expand your skill set as a developer, or if you get a job as a test engineer. This seems like an amazing resource. So thank you for helping put all these together.
Yeah.
Yeah, like biggest challenges in trying to document all these different practices that you had been using as a test engineer, like, and then figuring out how to like turn around and teach that. Were there like a lot of instinctual skills that you never really thought about until you had to turn around and teach?
Yeah, and there are some techniques that so I had this experience. I worked at a company called Teradata, and there like this was the sharpest like test automation team I'd ever worked on. It was just like packed with like all stars, and so we were, just kind of learning from one another, and had come up with like all of these wonderful techniques that I thought should be shared to the broader like engineering community. And so around that time is when I started like writing blog posts and doing conference talks just to share like some of these techniques. For example, I'll give you one that is not very instinctive. It's like, okay, let's say that you're tasked to do like some end-to-end scenario, or even just a simple GUI scenario. So for example, I need to test like that from a shopping cart. Like that's the test, right? So there's a lot of setup and stuff that goes into that. And these UI tests are notoriously known for being flaky. Um, and because like as you're like automating clicks, there's just timing issues. There's like
Yeah.
all sorts of things that come into play, right? And so like we started doing different techniques to like streamline this, like, and focus on what are you testing? All you really care about on that UI is if that delete button works. So what if you use like API calls, for example, to get the application in the state that you need it to? This is going to speed up your test, right? It's going to bypass all of that searching and clicking around that you're doing to set the tests up. And then you can just open that window. The product is already there. Your test clicks the button and you make sure that that's gone. Boom. So that's something that's like pretty straightforward, but it's not really intuitive for people who are developing these tests. And so like just sharing like those sorts of techniques and things like that, I think it has really resonated with people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the next thing I want to talk with you about is just sharing. You've been incredibly prolific in terms of creating blog posts, and of course, like sharing a lot of your thoughts on mentorship. I know that's something near and dear to your heart. Journey in toward becoming kind of like a developer educator, in addition to being a developer and a test engineer. And I imagine that's ultimately helped lead to your current role your current area of expertise, which is development.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that progression a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, around that time when I was like, yeah, I want to share things with people, whatever. So I started like writing the blog posts and I started attending conferences. I had a goal to speak at just one conference, Quincy, and that would like make me really happy. And so I did the one conference and then I started doing podcasts like these and then at some point like I started receiving these invitations to speak at conferences and it took on a life of its own. So at that time um I was working at Lexus. These sorts of like community engagement, I started building like a little name, a little brand for myself. And so I was hired by Twitter to come and do test automation there.
Hmm.
And so it's like, oh wow, I made it to the big leagues, you know. It's like leaving and then I was living in North Carolina. So leaving little North Carolina and I'm headed to Silicon Valley, you know, with like the big fish in tech. I remember just being so excited about that. And so yeah, I went to work even more of these like conference engagements started coming up and I went from just doing this speaking to also teaching workshops at these conferences, you know, like full day workshops on something like this is before Playwrights Day, but that would be a prime example. Like everybody wants to learn about Playwright. It's the hot new tool. Angie Jones is going to do a workshop. Oh, you know. And so yeah, I started doing that a lot and it became where I was like on the road probably about 75-80% of the time and that's not my job. Like my job is literally to do engineering at Twitter. And so I would find myself like out of the country, like let's say I'm in Europe or something on a totally different time zone and I'm doing like a full day workshop and then I would have to go back to my hotel room and do like 8 hours of my engineering work for Twitter. And so I started burning out pretty quickly, Quincy. And it's like, all right, I got to figure something out. I was like, I really enjoy the teaching and the speaking aspect, but like, I don't know how to make money from that, right? These conferences aren't paying like they might, you
Yeah.
know, get you a plane ticket to get in the door, but that's about it, right? And so I was like, I got to figure out how to make money. And I actually met like the CEO or sorry, one of the co-founders of Amplitudes while doing like the whole conference circuit scene. And so we were at dinner once and he was just telling me I was like kind of ranting about like how exhausted I was and I need to figure out how to make money from doing this. And he told me about developer relations. So I didn't even know that that was a thing. Again, with me and like being oblivious to like what's available as a career path. So yeah, he told me about it and also said like, you know, we could use someone like you at our company. Like we do test automation, it's AI, so that's like cutting edge innovation which you like or whatever. And so I made the leap into developer relations there.
Yeah. And what is developer relations for people who are uninitiated, as you were?
Yeah, so it's basically a role where you educate external developers about primarily about like how to use tools that your company makes, but it could also be broader as well. So for example, in that test automation role at Amplitude, so I would talk and teach about like the cool products that they were building, but also again about test automation just in general and practices. So it was cool. You basically go all around the world. Your scope expands from just the four walls that you work in, and now you're like basically a part of everyone, showing them like new techniques or new features in your favorite products or languages or things like that. So yeah, it's like talking shop and teaching like other developers about like new and cool things.
Okay. That's so I always viewed it as kind of like a hybrid, kind of like developer experience type role where like, yes, you're a developer and you can potentially turn around and like spec out or even implement, but you're like almost the front line in terms of think of the product, what kind of questions they have about it, where they're having trouble getting things done.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? Like you're
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, that's
doing a lot of user research.
yeah, you're basically like their contact person, right? They don't want to go to the help desk or, do a ticket, but like I'm gonna just ping Angie Jones on Twitter and I'm gonna ask her how how do I do X, Y, and Z with that product where she works, right? And then Angie Jones is gonna respond to you with like probably a gist link with some code in it or something like that, right? And so yeah, like, and you're getting a lot of insight. So as these conversations happen more and more, you learn some things, you see some patterns like, dang, this is like the fifth person this month who asked me, how do I use that feature? That means it's not intuitive. And so that's information I can bring back in house and say, y'all, we gotta fix this. Like no one knows how to do this. It's not intuitive at all. Here's some suggestions on a better developer experience, right? And I do a lot of that proactively. And so I'm very involved in like the design and the development phases of features as well. I'm like still today reviewing pull requests on a daily basis, and I'll call things out even before it gets into production, like, y'all, that's not a good name for that feature or that API,
Yeah.
or like, why do I have to like provide so much data? Could we not like slim this down, or you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
that's definitely a part of the role, to advocate for the developers that are going to use your product.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. Like basically you're just trying to stress free an experience as possible using your tools because they don't want to be like having to read like tons of documentation to implement something really simple, or they don't want to have confusing names or like so much of software development is a communication challenge, right? It's like
Yeah.
figuring out how to get somebody on the same page as you and understand the same concepts. And once you can establish that, like pretty much everything can be made simpler. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, to tell you like an anecdote, like Steve Jobs was very adamant with his engineers that the iPhone should only have one button.
Mm.
And so many people fought him and pushed back. We can't have a phone with one button. That's ridiculous. We'll never be able to do that. And yet he was like kind of advocating for the typical, what would ultimately become the mass market iPhone user who didn't want to have a phone with like 50 buttons or like a BlackBerry or something, right? They just wanted a simple device, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, the engineers were able to get it done with just one button. And then a few years after Steve Jobs' death, like they figured out a way to like get it down to like zero buttons, essentially, where you just swipe and everything's like about what you've been doing since then. Like, so you've risen several positions. I don't know exactly like what. I don't even have your LinkedIn right in front of me, but you've been promoted a lot over the years. And what
I
is
do
your?
good work, Quincy. I do good work. What can I say?
There we go. Yeah. What is like a typical kind of like week in the life of Angie Jones like? Like, do you spend most of your time in New Orleans, or are you still traveling a lot?
I travel a ton. So New Orleans is home, which basically might as well be like a vacation spot for me. Because I'm on the road quite a bit. Which is fun. I'm not complaining. Like that's really exciting to be able to like actually go and talk to people in real life, and like, kind of geek out over software or whatever. But yeah, what I'm doing now, like I love working on the cutting edge of innovation. And so right now I'm working on some open standards that are actually part of W3C which is the Web 3. What is it called?
The
The
World Wide
World
Web
Wide
Consortium.
Web Consortium. The
Yeah.
World Wide Web. That's why it's three W's,
Yeah.
World
People
Wide.
always think like W3 schools is associated with that. It's not. It's not an official W3C thing.
Oh.
But they chose a name that was like confusing enough, and so a lot of people just thought it was the standard documentation. Kind of like if like FreeCodeCamp called itself like the Mozilla Developer Network or something like
Yeah,
MDN,
yeah.
when it's
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
that's like yeah.
That's
Anyway,
different. Okay. So yeah, some of these standards are around like digital identity and like credentials and things. And so it's really exciting work, and it can be applied to so many domains. At TBD, we are a fintech company. We're part of Block. And so we're looking at it from like a fintech use case. Like, how do I move money across borders? Because that's super hard. Quincy, I know you have like a lot of people
Yeah.
from like, Nigeria and other African countries
Yeah.
that frequent free code camp. So like I went to Nigeria last year, and I hired this videographer to just kind of follow me around and capture my first time in Nigeria. And I sent him the payment um before I even left, right? And I had to do this with a bank transfer because there's no easy way for me to just like cash app him
Yeah.
across borders. And so I sent him this wire payment. By the time I got there, he still hadn't received it, but he was kind enough to still do the work. By the time the trip was over, he still hadn't received it. By the
Oh,
time I got home, he still hadn't received it. So I'm just like showing him receipts where I swear I paid you or whatever, and he's having to take these receipts to his bank. And so anyway, it's just like super complicated to send
yeah.
money across borders. And so we're looking at like these new like digital standards that allow you to do this in a frictionless way, so that it's easy. Like that would be very nice if I could just like open Venmo and like send this guy money or whatever. And so like I said, these technologies, they're called like verifiable credentials. So they
Verifiable
can be
credentials.
verifiable credentials. So I actually have this talk that I'm touring right now called like how I bought booze with JOTs, which are JSON web tokens. So verifiable credentials are basically just a form of JSON web tokens, and JSON web tokens are used in web app development for authentication, right?
Yeah.
So if you had like a server, and they might send like this JOT to the client, so that the client anytime the user wants to take further actions, right? And so they don't have to re-authenticate with every action. And so what we've done is taken like that same technology. The job consists of like a body, which is just JSON. And so it's like, what else can you can basically represent almost anything in JSON format. So what about like claims and things like that? So for my case, my Louisiana, in case you didn't know, Quincy, Louisiana is the first state in the United States to roll out the mobile driver's license. So there's been more states since us, but we were the first. So with this mobile driver's license, I basically have this digital identification that lives in a wallet on my phone. And what's cool about this is like it can issue like these JOTs, these tokens, these verifiable credentials to other businesses that might need to verify my identity or like any other information about me. So the scenario that I experienced was like I needed to order wine
Yeah.
off like a delivery service app. And so I did that. And the way that typically would work is like, not the identity part. They can't verify my age. And then when the driver shows up, they have to remember to check my ID, right? And if they don't, then, they can be legally liable. So could the delivery company. So,
Yeah.
so could the alcohol.
This is a huge burden on like small business owners like bodegas and places like that. The fact that
You
they can
know?
get like serious fines for screwing up and
Yeah,
like misreading an ID or forgetting to ask for an ID. And yeah,
that's
like
right.
I just want to emphasize, like I am 100% in favor of people under 21 not being able to drink alcohol. It can interfere with like their mental development, and
Yes.
there's lots of alcohol related accidents and stuff. But we need better systems so that like people that are working in a convenience store like 12 hours a day don't have to like aren't like potentially gonna become extinct. Like their business isn't gonna go under because they get some massive fine for
Yeah, that's
forgetting to like
exactly right.
card some undercover cop or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so, what this does is now allows a way to basically digitally share this information and verify it, right? And so, my mobile driver's license app, right? So that app basically connected with the delivery app before the purchase was question, is she over 21? Is she of drinking age? And my app didn't have to show them my entire ID and say, you figure it out for yourself, right? A bodega person. No, they were able to say, okay, yeah, I'll issue a JOT, a verifiable credential that says yes, true, she's over 21, because that's all the information that
Right.
you need, right? And because these jots are basically cryptographically signed, like, they haven't been tampered with, who was the source of issuing this information, and you can trust government saying that she is over 21. And so cool. So now all of that is done before the purchase is made, and now is able to, like, that burden is not on, like, the
Yeah.
stores or the poor delivery driver or whatever. So that's how it's being used. I'm seeing it across the board, Quincy, and things like education. You should do this, Quincy. I'm going to work with you offline. But you can issue like these verifiable credentials to, like, say, yes, someone has completed a course or they've completed a degree or something like that. People are using them, and like Cuba has basically started using these to allow people to enter the country. So you can basically obtain this credential before you even leave the house, and you're good to go. And it's like really speeding up, like, their lines at the airport and stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's really cool technology. I'm having a really good time.
Yeah, and just one of the things that I think is very important, and is perhaps like I hadn't really even thought about this before until I was talking with one of my security friends, and he was telling me, like, it's ridiculous that you have to show your entire driver's license to anybody. Like, that includes your address, it includes your date of birth, it includes like so much information that could be used to gain access to your bank account, or if people know where you live, they can send armed thugs to your house to, like, take your money or passwords, right, or something like that, right? So, like, love the idea of having credentials that just share exactly what is needed and nothing more.
And nothing
Like,
more.
if I authenticate with like an app and I'm like, okay, I'm app, and it says Google, Google will give them your email address and nothing else or something like that, then I'm like, okay, cool. My email address, that's not a big deal. But like, if they're asking for like 10 different things, I can say, never mind, I don't want to use this app, right?
Yeah, don't worry about it. You,
And
you want
it's just good data hygiene to not have, your passport or like all this KYC, like know your customer type stuff, anti-money laundering stuff, like, just floating around in the ether, right? Like,
that's exactly the case as we're working on at TBD. So the KYC, the anti-money laundering, like all of these like compliance things you need in order to move money. Cool. You need them, but can we do this in a form that's like privacy preserving and not like just like sharing my info back and forth across the web?
Yeah. And you earlier you mentioned like the difficulty of sending funds to Nigeria. I sent funds, from Nigeria on our staff. We also have people in like Kenya, Bangladesh, places that have, frankly, like less financial technology infrastructure, right? Like, and a lot of that is not because of technology; it's because like government regulations or something like that. Like, it's complicated. I have had to use like pretty much every different tool under the sun to send funds over the past few years. Like, there are a lot of people that are, crypto detractors, and I'm not gonna say that I'm like a huge crypto time to send
when
funds.
you need to send money.
Yeah. There have been some really nice innovations, like this tool SendWave works pretty well. That's what I've been using for Bangladesh. It still works for Bangladesh, but it stopped working for Nigeria. So now we're using USD coin to send funds to developers in Nigeria. So like, I'm very excited about the work you're doing. It's going to make it a lot easier, because currently people have to like spend a whole lot of time and energy getting the right bank account, and like, for whatever reason right now in Nigeria, their currency is like locked down and you can't send funds there, or like sending funds to Ukraine. We have a dev in Ukraine, and I have to send it as multiple transactions because they're like these really low transaction limits, and there are so many transaction costs. It's ridiculous.
That's
like
right.
Western Union. Western Union's great. It's like the bank for the unbanked, essentially. But the transaction fees are absurd when you compare them with like Like you and I, Angie, we live in the United States of America.
Right, right.
You and I can send ACH back and forth all day long for zero fees. Like I think Chase gives you like a certain amount for free, and then you have to start paying. But it's like, I don't know, it's like 25 cents a transaction or something. Nothing compared to like if you try to use Coinbase or if you try to use some of these other tools, it's exorbitant. So
Right.
yeah, that like so security, transaction cost, and just general availability, and not having to wait for days and days. And I
You
just feel
got it.
really
I don't
bad
even
for your
got to do a
videographer.
thing. Quincy, you already got it. That's exactly right. So those are the problems that we're looking to solve with the verifiable credentials as well as the other like fintech open, basically like a new open rail for money movement across borders. So I'm gonna send you some info. I mean, you can put it in the links, but I want
Yeah,
you to read
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. So I want to make sure that we've talked. We've been talking for a long time. We've covered a lot of ground, but I want to make sure that like we've covered. There are so many different facets to you as a person, as a developer, as a manager, and just I have just a few quick questions. First, I want to shout out this quote that you have that I think is so powerful, and that everybody should keep this in mind. Don't trust a test you've never seen fail.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there's so many situations where I forget to go red light, like, oh, green light. My task passed the
Yeah,
first
good,
time. My
good
code
to
must be
go.
perfect.
Yeah.
Do you have any like really quick tips for people that are writing tests? Like, don't do this.
Yeah.
Any horror stories?
Yeah, like I've seen it all pretty much. I review a lot of codes. So I've seen the like true equals true, and things like that. And I've seen ones where people are trying to actually test, but it's broken. It's that. And you go and evaluate the test and you realize, oh my God, this test will never fail, right? Because the way that it was designed was not correct. And so I always, anytime I write a test, like, yeah, I do want to see that green, but I don't trust that green until like I then break the feature and I run the test again. I say, okay, now I can trust doing this job and I can fix it and go ahead and submit that test.
Yeah, that's awesome. And as far as like mentoring people and encouraging them to get better at testing, like, are there any like exercises or anything that you would recommend that people could try at home? Of course, they can check out Test Automation University, but like, are there any like just general like fun things that you'll do in like a classroom or like a mentorship setting? Like, I know you mentor a lot of kids through. Is it called Diva Chicks?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like when you mentor kids, like, do you have any like creative ways to like get them to like perk up and like become more interested in writing code or even writing tests?
Yeah, I actually like give for the code piece or just like how to think through like software, right? And how software works. I typically give them some sort of scenario. That used to be like getting money from an ATM, but that might be like a little played out now, Quincy.
Yeah. I haven't used an ATM in like at least a year or two.
But like some sort of scenario where they need to think through like a human action, right? And then equate that to what do you have to tell the computer to do? And it's a really good exercise. The computer is just as smart as like the instructions that you give it, and it's not going to think on your behalf, right? And so if you don't tell it something very explicitly to do, like if this, do this, otherwise do that, it's always just gonna do the that,
Yeah.
right? And so just helping them to see like logical thinking and how to express that in terms that a computer could understand. Like I think that's really powerful, even with like pseudocode, right? You don't even have to get into the code of it, but just the logical thinking behind it. So those are the sorts of exercises I love to do with students. And nowadays, like with the AI hype, there's one great one exercise that I did I really like. I did it with Scratch, so we don't have to like get into like
Yeah. And
straight up programming or anything. But this was not even just for kids. This was for adults too. I
okay.
I took this to conferences, Quincy, but it was like basically like you're training a AI model in a certain way, but then you ask the AI model to make something and you see that it totally gets it wrong. And so you take a step back and say, why did that happen? And you start evaluating the data that you trained it on, and you realize like, oh, okay, that was not great data. How can I diversify this data so that it's able to accurately recognize patterns and things like that, and then retrain it to do a better job? So
Yeah.
that's a really good one too. It has a little bit of testing in there.
Awesome. And since we're on the topic of AI, and like I know you're somebody who's very much like up on like probably the new tools and everything, uh, I have to ask this to everybody because everybody asks this to me. Like, how do you see AI like software development and especially test automation? Like when I say AI, I'm talking about tools like GPT-4, for example, over the next few years. Like are there? Do you think it's going to be powerful and time saving for test engineers?
I do. I do. And I think that it'll help. Like, there's a lot of tedious work that goes into test automation, right? One of them, I had like this really great talk that I gave on how do you identify which tests you should even automate. And that was great for its time. And now when I look at AI, I'm like, well, to do that is pretty tedious because I walk you through like several things that you should think about and metrics you should collect and stuff like that to determine this takes a quite a bit of time and effort to do that, and you like realistically probably don't have that time to do on a regular basis. And so the things like AI can help with that sort of thing where you describe some of what you're building and ask for like scenarios or whatever. Now I wouldn't trust it 100% to like actually write all of the code and like and then like we're just good to go or whatever, but it's definitely helpful in getting you started as well as like brainstorming and debugging when you run into errors and things like that. So from a testing standpoint, I'm gonna just say from a software development standpoint, like we've utilized it on this last release that we just did quite heavily. Um, and I'll tell you how. So we built an SDK in TypeScript. So that was built pretty much, just straight up engineers building that. Then we needed to convert this to have also a Kotlin SDK. We needed a Swift SDK. And so it's like, oh my gosh. So we need all of this within like 2 months. No one on the team is an expert in those languages. And so this was a great exercise where we didn't just give the code base to like Chat GPT and say, spit it out in Swift or anything like that. But like as you are basically like rewriting these features in a like take a function and say, here's this function in like Kotlin, how might I be able to do this in Swift? And it's been very helpful for that. It's not 100% accurate, but you can take that, you can modify it, you can make it meet your code, and it's definitely a lot for us to do. I believe like software developers should be using these tools as an assistant.
Yeah, 100%. It sounds like it's really great for porting an SDK, like a software development kit, I think, or
Yeah,
is that what
yeah, that's
SDK
right.
stands for? Yeah, to, like porting it from one programming language to another, for example. Is that I mean that could be a very tedious process. Like I don't want to have to be like, okay, let me dust off my
Yeah,
Swift
let me
book
go. Let me
over
go
here.
learn Swift.
Yeah, I mean that's something that these tools are very good at. Is it has read every Swift book under the sun. So here,
Yeah,
like, and it can kind of
and then
draw.
I've already written the logic, right?
Mhm.
And so I can just say, I just need this in a different language, or where you say, I know what I want to say in English. Can you help me translate this in Spanish? And whatever you get from there might not be 100% right for that. Um, but for the most part, it's pretty good,
Yeah,
right? So yeah, I think
serviceable.
this is kind of same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Well, yeah, Angie, it's been so awesome catching up with you, getting your insights, learning more about your own journey into software development, and I'm so grateful that your dad pushed you to pick up computers. And I mean, my goodness, like so much has transpired from there. I'm so, happy that that professor encouraged you to switch your major over to computer science. And I mean, this might sound kind of weird, but I'm really happy that that manager at IBM told you like,
We,
hey,
we
you're in
give
trouble. You
him
need to
no
share your
credit.
opinions more,
We give
right?
him no credit, Quincy.
I won't give him credit, but I'm happy. It sounds like it worked out for the better, right?
We made lemonade. We made lemonade.
Yeah, and I just want to encourage everybody like to just follow Angie on Twitter. She's super active there. Of course, she used to work at Twitter, so it's like social media and is like the water you swim in practically as you swim from one conference to the other.
That's right.
it, it sounds like you're gonna get a lot of miles this year. I hope you get don't get sick too many times, and I hope you don't miss too many flights and everything. But yeah, it's really inspiring to have you in the community, just out there getting things done, sharing your wisdom as you go through blog posts, through tools like Test Automation University, and yeah, like I just want to emphasize like we're ecstatic to have you in the community, and I hope many people listening to this go on to learn a great deal from you.
Thank you so much for having me, Quincy. It's a pleasure.
All right, everyone. Well, until next week, happy coding.